Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Lipka. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Improbable. And today, what I'll be doing is something a little bit different than the kinds of presentations I usually do, which involve lots of KPIs and nice revenue graphs. And I'll be talking about the vision of Improbable and a little bit about our technology and some of the application areas. If you were to Google us, or if you were to Baidu us, as the case may be, you'd find some nice stats. We've got like 300 employees. Our last round was about 500 million left by SoftBank. And we have a number of different partner projects going on and some big partnerships with Google and the like. However, if you actually read about what we do, you get very different kinds of explanations. We've been called a VR company, we've been called a defense company, we've been called a city simulation company, we've been called a video games company. And so they're not necessarily wrong. However, there is a reason why we are attacking all these different verticals. And that's because at the core, they all have an impact on our vision. And that vision is the idea of this multiversal self, that in the future, we will all live in multiple worlds at the same time, all but one of them being actual virtual worlds. Now, that sounds very dystopian, but these worlds would not be the kinds of picture that a lot of movies or books portray. We're talking about worlds where we will be become better as individuals. We will have a very fulfilling experience. Like one of my favorite examples to give to illustrate this idea is not actually from some of the industries we're working in, but with travel, to give you a less provocative idea. So before the invention of mechanized transport, you as an individual will be shaped very much by the people around you. Your family, your immediate friends. You wouldn't have traveled very far to experience completely new cultures. However, nowadays, you can jump onto a steel tube, fly 30,000 feet in the air, go to the other side of the world, and experience a completely new experiences. So you can have, for example, experience new culture, new food, new weather. And I think we all agree that this is a good thing. We come back from these experiences usually refreshed with new ideas. But why have limits of the real world? Why have the limits of any kind of monetary limits that we have, any kind of time limits, or even why experience just what's available in this real world? And in Improbable, we believe these virtual worlds will be coming, but they will also go beyond leisure. They'll impact the way you do business. They'll impact the way you do like learning. It will also impact the way that you actually make money. And we will derive a lot of meaning from these worlds. Right now, we derive different types of meanings from different places. A lot of us, hopefully most of us, derive a lot of meaning from our families. A lot of us derive a lot of meaning from some of the extracurricular activities we do, like sports, right? A lot of us derive meaning from our jobs. You know, if you're a lawyer or an accountant, or if you work in medicine, you feel that you're adding to the world, you're making it a better place. Unfortunately, some of us don't have that opportunity because of the environment, or because of the country that we live in, or the economy doesn't necessarily value the things that we find valuable, and so therefore will not pay us for it. This is going to be very much more important even with automation. Like, automation will start changing the world. We've all heard at this conference quite a lot of doom and gloom about automation, some positive sides too. But if the stats really do pan out, and in 2030, 1/3 of American jobs will be automated, for example, where are people going to find that value? Where are they going to spend their time? Now, this all sounds very, very futuristic, but I argue that some of these virtual worlds already exist in smaller form right now. We spend a lot of time in them. So in social media, the average American spends nearly 2 hours a day on social media. Some of the teens spend upwards of 9 hours. Video games. In China, 12% of the population say they spend 25 or more hours per week playing video games. But yet over half of them say that also lets them reconnect with their family and their friends. My favorite example of a virtual world is actually YouTube. We go online for YouTube for multiple reasons. We want to go there for entertainment. It's especially good if you're a cat lover, or if you want to do some research, or if you learn something new. However, YouTube is great in the sense that it allows you to create new things, and it also allows you to monetize. there are people out there who fundamentally live and breathe YouTube. They make a lot of money from YouTube. Their entire lives revolve around it. They work with the community, they communicate with other YouTubers, they create videos. In fact, I would argue that they put a lot more value on YouTube than some of the things that they put in their real life. So where will these virtual worlds come from? I feel like sometimes when we look at the past and look at the big technological shifts that happen in society and the societal shifts, we feel that they suddenly come at once. With the iPhone, suddenly everyone had a smartphone. But if you really look at them, you see that there are fundamental technological shifts happening before that that have laid the groundwork, as well as cultural shifts. It was acceptable once the iPhone came out that you can actually be available at all times, everywhere you go, via phone, via email, via instant messaging. I believe that all of the above media have some groundwork, laying some groundwork for these virtual worlds, but ultimately games have the most potential. Games have the potential to actually create these complete new experiences that some of the other media cannot. And when I mean games, I don't mean casual games. Casual games tend to tap into that part of humanity that also taps into gambling or that fast iteration cycle and getting that very fast instant gratification. Instead, I'm talking about games that what we call have meaningful complexity. Now, this is a real struggle to explain this kind of abstract concept, but I'll try. So the idea of meaningful complexity is that complexity in games gives users the pleasure of trying to understand it and figure it out, or utilize it, or manipulate it in some way such that they get gratification when it works. And as a result, they're willing to invest. They're willing to invest brain power, they're willing to invest time, they're willing to invest money into figuring out that complexity. And you can be creative with it. It's a little bit like the difference between chess and tic-tac-toe. With chess, it's a much more compelling game than tic-tac-toe. There are people who have dedicated their lives to the game of chess. As far as I know, no one's dedicated their lives to the game of tic-tac-toe, but I may be wrong about that. It's also why multiplayer games are ultimately so much more exciting and have been the main driver of revenue in the games industry for the past decade. Because the absolute best way to introduce complexity into a game is actually through introducing other humans. However, that complexity has to be useful. We shouldn't add complexity for the sake of adding complexity. Like adding 10 extra chess pieces to chess wouldn't necessarily make it a better game. So when we look back at the past and over the last decade, we believe that games are becoming more and more complex. And the best way to illustrate that is looking at what the adults of tomorrow are playing right now, i.e. children. And these two games especially stand out, Roblox and especially Minecraft. So hopefully Minecraft doesn't need too much of an introduction, but it's a game that really exudes this complexity. It's a completely big, persistent world where you can pretty much build anything you want. There are exploration features, there's survival features, you can play with your friends. Ultimately, it's an incredibly complex game. And yet, in December of last year, it still had 75 million monthly active users. This is nearly a decade after it was released. And to put that into perspective, that's still more than, I believe, the latest Fortnite figures currently, which is completely changing the charts. And that's because, the game itself is so complex that there's always new things to learn. And the formula really hasn't changed since then. And as a result, kids care, and they care a lot. To give you an idea, there are conferences. There's over a dozen conferences in the US for Minecraft, the largest of which actually rival Rise in size. It's crazy. They buy toys, they have books, there's articles for parents on how to survive the conferences. It's really, it's really permeated into our culture as well. And so, Minecraft has left the virtual world and has actually entered our real world. And so our hypothesis in Improbable is this. Is that complexity results in engagement. And if you're in the games industry, you know that engagement effectively also results in monetization. And how much better monetization could games have? I don't have this on the slides, but games are, funnily enough, the least monetized entertainment product on a per-hour basis. AKA, they monetize less well than film, TV, and books on a per-hour basis. So there's lots of scope to monetize them better. But what happens when these games start evolving into virtual worlds and their complexity starts rivaling the real worlds? What happens then? Could they start fighting for the kind of monetization that the real world has, like potentially going for the travel budgets or going for some of the other going out budgets that you have or extracurricular budgets that you have here in the real world? And so Improbable is in the business of using technology to support more complexity in online games. Our first product is Spatial OS. I won't have too much time to cover it in detail, but the idea of Spatial OS is that it's a platform as a service that allows any game developer, be that a one-man band in their bedroom or a AAA game developer, to build these online games and make them more complex than anything else is that in the market. And they can do that via the existing tool sets that they already know. For example, they can use some incredible tools like the Unity game engine or the Unreal game engine to build these new complex online worlds. And whilst meaningful complexity in itself is quite hard to describe, the games that are coming out do tend to have some of these features. For example, massive scale. Imagine thousands of players in the same world, or millions of entities that make it very interesting to be in. Or meaningful persistence. People only start caring about things if they're ultimately there all the time. If they're transient, then you can't care about it. So by default, the games, they're things that if you drop a sword in the game and you log out and you log back in, it will always still be there. And rich simulation. You can augment these worlds with very interesting AI. You can create ecologies of thousands of creatures, or you can create incredible physics as well. And the reason why this is possible nowadays is because of the easy access to compute. With the power of the cloud and companies like Amazon and Alibaba, we have access to thousands of machines on demand. The problem with that is it's often very hard to actually be able to utilize these machines to create one large world. Spatial OS helps fill that gap. In the same way, serverless computing or some of the other services also help fill the gap of actually being able to utilize all these large number of servers. As a result, we're getting some awesome games coming out. And the top left is Worlds Adrift. This is one single uncharted world per region that has every single object is fully physical and is completely persistent. We have Automaton, who are making Mavericks. Mavericks is a game that's going toe-to-toe with PUBG and Fortnite at the end of this year with a 400-person Battle Royale mode, but without making any of the sacrifices that you would have to do with existing technology in terms of how you shoot and some of the feel of the game. Seed is another game that's, the idea of it is that you try and populate an entire world to ensure the survival of humanity. Like simulation games tend not to be even multiplayer, let alone in a massively multiplayer way, so this could be a genre-defining game. And then the bottom left one, if you think that doesn't seem like a game, you'll be right. And one of the things we realized very early on in Improbable's history, that this technology has huge application areas outside of gaming as well. What if we try to treat the real world like a virtual world? What if we try to recreate it in a virtual world? Imagine recreating an entire city. Its vehicle infrastructure, its people, its power infrastructure, property. If you could put that in one virtual world, you could have the most powerful decision-making tool that is out there for large-scale decisions. You could understand what would be the impact of closing down a critical piece of infrastructure or creating a completely new road network in that city. However, even before thinking about the complexity that arises of multiple systems cooperating, the complexity within any one of these verticals is incredibly interesting and incredibly valuable to simulate in and of itself. One of the things that all of these things have in common is that they have huge amounts of existing infrastructure, huge amounts of OPEX and CAPEX, and they're all undergoing a huge amount of disruption. Mining is driving for our complete 100% automation to be competitive. Telecommunication companies are looking to understand how to roll out 5G. Power is undergoing multiple disruptions at the same time. Everything from electric vehicles, shift to renewables, distributed energy generation, all these things create a huge amount of complexity in the system as a whole. And what we found is that companies often understand how one piece of the puzzle works, like how a wind farm works. However, don't understand the system at scale and with its interconnectedness. And as a result, things like blackouts, even in first world countries, and brownouts happen quite often. And so as a result, being able to simulate this will effectively allow us to make better decisions in how we create these infrastructure. And one thing that machine learning and big data cannot help us is with understanding this. The reason is they tend to look at previous data to try and predict the future. But some of these disruptions have never happened before. And so there's a limitation to how much they can help with our decision-making power. And that leads me to my final point. One of the unique things about Improbable is that we actually have two visions. We have the vision of the multiversal self, that in the future, we will live in multiple enriching worlds at the same time. But we also have the idea of the optimized world, that in the future, in the one world that will be common to all of us, the real world, we will understand it better by simulating all its different complex systems, such that we can then optimize them to make it a better place. Thank you very much for listening, and please reach out in either this world or any virtual world of your choosing if you want to talk more. Thank you very much.